Millionaire woman is shocked when she meets her ex-husband who abandoned her years ago again. If you've ever watched someone realize in a single heartbeat that they destroyed the best thing they ever had, then you already know what Claire Sutton's face looked like that night. But let's go back. Because this story doesn't begin in a ballroom, it begins in a break room, 7 years ago, with a woman who thought she knew exactly what she wanted. The fluorescent lights of Hargrove and Associates had a way of making everyone look slightly unwell. But at 25, Claire Sutton wore even bad lighting beautifully. She was the kind of woman people noticed without quite knowing why. Not because she dressed to impress, but because she carried herself like someone who had already decided she was going somewhere. She just hadn't figured out the fastest route yet. She had ambition the way some people have good posture, naturally, unconsciously, and in a way that made strangers either admire her or resent her before she had said a single word. The other women at the firm saw it. The partners saw it. Daniel Hargrove, who made a habit of seeing things before other people did, saw it most clearly of all. She had been Marcus Webb's wife for 14 months when the opportunity arrived, gift-wrapped in Italian silk in a corner office on the 42nd floor. Daniel Hargrove, 51, silver-haired, and wealthy in the specific way that made rooms rearrange themselves around him, had been watching Claire quietly for 3/4. He admired her precision, her instincts, and, if anyone had pressed him honestly, the way she filled a boardroom with something more than competence. He was the kind of man who collected beautiful, capable things, and he had decided, with the calm certainty of someone who always got what he reached for, that Claire Sutton was next on that list. He promoted her in March. By June, he was taking her to client dinners at places where the waiters memorized your name after one visit. By September, he was asking her things that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. He asked what she wanted her life to look like in 10 years. He asked if she felt she was operating at her full capacity. He asked these questions over candlelight and excellent wine, and he asked them in a way that made her feel as though no one had ever truly asked before. Claire told herself it was business. Then she told herself it was complicated. Then she stopped telling herself anything at all, because Daniel had a way of making the future look very bright and the present look very small. He spoke about what she could become as though what she already was had simply been a rehearsal. And she was young enough and hungry enough to let herself believe him. Marcus knew something was shifting before she told him. He was that kind of man, quiet and observant in the way that people often mistake for simplicity. He worked in civil engineering, designing bridges and drainage systems for the city, the kind of work that nobody celebrated at dinner parties but everyone depended on when the roads held and the tunnels didn't flood. He came home tired and smelling of coffee and blueprints. He asked about her day every evening without fail. He made dinner on Tuesdays. He remembered things, small things, the kind of details people stop noting after the first year of marriage. He loved her in the unhurried architectural way he approached everything. Built to last, reinforced at every joint, designed for conditions worse than any he expected to face. He was 28 years old and completely unprepared for what was coming. But the truth is that no amount of preparation would have changed it, because what was coming was not a conversation he could have won. It had already been decided in a corner office 42 floors above Madison Avenue. She asked for a divorce on a Sunday evening in October. The air in the apartment was still. There was something on the stove she'd meant to turn off and hadn't. She said she needed more. She said she felt trapped. She said a lot of things that were partially true and entirely insufficient. The language of someone constructing a justification, rather than explaining a truth. What she didn't say, the thing she couldn't say out loud because it would have made her the villain in a story she was still trying to narrate as a tragedy, was that Daniel Hargrove had already asked her to move into his penthouse on the Upper West Side. Marcus didn't yell, he didn't beg. He sat at the kitchen table they had picked out together at a flea market in Brooklyn, the one with the slightly uneven leg that they'd shimmed with a folded matchbook, and ran one hand slowly across the worn wood grain. He was quiet for a very long time. The only sound was the stove that hadn't been turned off yet. Then he said, "Okay, Claire, if that's what you need." That was the moment she should have stayed. She knows that now. She has known it for a long time. She left anyway. The divorce was finalized in December, 17 days before Christmas. Claire moved into Daniel's penthouse and told herself she had chosen the bigger life. Marcus signed the papers without requesting a single modification, packed 2 boxes, and moved into a studio apartment in Queens that had a window facing a brick wall. His colleagues at the engineering firm said he seemed fine, steady, the same as always. His mother, Ruth Webb, a retired schoolteacher from Cleveland who had loved Claire like a daughter and never said one word against her, called Marcus every Sunday and pretended not to hear the silence on his end of the line. Nobody talked about what happened next, because nothing dramatic did, not right away. Life after heartbreak is mostly administrative. There are accounts to separate, subscriptions to cancel, a last name to reconsider. Claire kept Webb for 8 months because changing it felt like admitting something about the value of what she had abandoned. Then she changed it back. Claire Sutton. A woman who had chosen herself. The years with Daniel were not unhappy exactly. They were polished. There were trips to Monaco and Sao Paulo and a winter week in Kyoto that Claire photographed extensively and felt only partially present for. Daniel was generous and intellectually stimulating and entirely certain of himself, in ways she had once found magnetic and gradually found exhausting. By 29, she had begun to understand the difference between a man who makes you feel important and a man who actually sees you. Daniel Hargrove was very good at the first. She was not sure he was capable of the second. She stayed until 31. Then she left Daniel too, though that departure was cleaner, a mutual unwinding with the brisk efficiency of 2 professionals who had run the numbers and agreed on the outcome. A handshake in a lawyer's office. A settlement that left her financially independent for the first time in her adult life. Daniel moved on to a younger associate within 6 months. Claire was not surprised. She was not particularly hurt. What she felt, mostly, was tired in the specific way of someone who has been performing a version of themselves for so long that they can no longer locate the original. She spent 6 months alone in her midtown apartment, running the consulting firm she had quietly built on the side during the last 2 years with Daniel. Sutton Strategic, 3 employees, a growing reputation, work that was genuinely hers. At 32, Claire Sutton had money, independence, and the specific kind of loneliness that arrives after you've gotten everything you thought you wanted. She was managing it fine. She kept telling herself that right up until the night of the Meridian Business Gala. The Meridian was one of those annual New York events that existed at the intersection of genuine industry and expensive theater. A black tie fundraiser that doubled as a networking arena for people who had long ago stopped carrying business cards because their names were sufficient. Claire attended every year. It was useful and visible, and she navigated it with the ease of someone who has stopped being impressed by rooms. She arrived at 8, greeted 3 clients, made small talk with a woman whose foundation she'd been meaning to contact, and was crossing toward the East Terrace when everything stopped. She didn't recognize him immediately. That's the part she returns to, that half-second of not knowing, of registering only a tall man in a charcoal Brioni suit with the kind of presence that makes a room arrange itself differently, speaking to 2 other men with the unhurried authority of someone who has nothing left to prove. A boy stood at his side, perhaps 7 years old, in a perfectly fitted miniature version of the same suit, watching the adults with calm, serious dark eyes that were almost comically composed for his age. And then the man turned his head, just slightly, and the candlelight caught the line of his jaw. Claire's lungs forgot their instructions. Marcus Webb. Except not the man she remembered, because this man had been sharpened by something the years had brought him, and he stood in that room like someone who had survived a fire and come out of it knowing exactly what he was made of. She stood completely still for 4 full seconds. Then she started to turn away, and Marcus looked up. His gaze found her with a precision that suggested it had never entirely lost its sense of direction. He looked at her. He did not smile. He did not cross the room. And in those 3 seconds of eye contact across 400 people, Claire felt the floor shift beneath her heels in a way that had nothing at all to do with the marble. Then he looked back at the men he was speaking with, as if she were simply part of the room, as if she were a detail, as if she were nothing he needed to account for. She had expected anger, not explosive, that had never been Marcus, but the controlled, careful kind, the banked resentment of a man who had been wronged and knew it precisely. She had expected tension at minimum, A jaw set too tight. The subtle readjustment of someone in the presence of a person who once cost them everything. She had braced herself, in the part of her brain that runs calculations about danger, for a confrontation she was capable of navigating. She had scripts prepared for bitterness, for accusation, for the weighted silence of unfinished business. She was a skilled communicator. She would have handled any of those things. What she found instead was stillness. Not the stillness of restraint, not the stillness of a man holding something back. The stillness of completion, of someone who had arrived at a page that simply no longer contained her name, and was too far into the next chapter to find the old one worth reopening. He had looked at her. He had confirmed that yes, his eyes had found her correctly. And then he had returned to his conversation as though she were simply a detail in the landscape, a familiar face at a crowded party, requiring no further response. Claire moved to the bar. She ordered sparkling water, changed her mind and ordered whiskey, held the glass without drinking it, and spent the next several minutes performing the act of being completely fine with the practiced commitment of someone who has had years of rehearsal. She smiled at a venture capitalist from Boston whose name she already knew she would not remember. She laughed at something a woman in a red dress said. She moved through the room with her shoulders level and her chin up, and the ease of a woman who has always known where she belongs, which she did know. In every room except the one she currently occupied, where belonging felt like a concept she was failing in real time. But her peripheral vision tracked one charcoal suit. She watched him the way you watch something you don't want anyone to catch you watching. She watched the way he laughed, slower than she remembered, deeper, as if laughter had become something he rationed because he valued it. She watched the way the two men he was speaking with deferred to him, the unconscious forward lean of people in the presence of authority or warmth, or the particular combination of both that Marcus had apparently grown into without her noticing. She watched the boy at his side who ate hors d'oeuvres with the gravity of a small senator, and occasionally tugged at his father's sleeve to point out something across the room. And Marcus always stopped. Always. Mid-sentence, without irritation or delay, he always looked at what the boy was showing him first. It was not a performance, it was simply what he did. The unremarkable, unconditional reflex of a father who has decided, somewhere along the way, that this is the thing that matters most. His son. She had known, in the distant, compressed way you know things you have deliberately filed in a drawer you don't open. A colleague had mentioned it 2 years after the divorce on a second marriage briefly, and she had said and moved the conversation elsewhere and not looked at it again. She did not know the full story. She did not know what had happened to the second wife or when or why. She did not know the boy's name. She only knew what she was seeing now. A child who was unmistakably his father's, standing at his father's side in a miniature suit, watching the world with the careful, quiet attention of someone who has learned that the world requires it. She was still watching when a hand touched her elbow. Richard Aldane, 60, commercial real estate, 2 months of unanswered meeting requests. The particular expression of a man who has finally caught someone he has been trying to reach. Under ordinary circumstances, she would have been genuinely pleased. She pivoted, extended her hand, gave him 6 minutes of her cleanest professional attention, and tracked a charcoal suit in her peripheral vision the entire time. It was not her best moment. She was very aware of that. When she looked back, Marcus had moved to a position near the windows overlooking Central Park. He was speaking now with a woman in an emerald gown, mid-40s, polished. The specific kind of attractive that announces capability before it announces anything else. They were not standing close in any way that carried meaning. It was business, or the social adjacency of two people at the same event. The woman produced a business card. Marcus took it with a small nod, slid it into his jacket pocket without looking at it, polite, unhurried, entirely in command of his own level of interest. Claire watched this exchange with an intensity completely disproportionate to what it actually was, and she knew it, and she watched anyway. She told herself she was reading the room professionally. She was not reading the room. She was watching a man she had left 7 years ago accept a business card from a woman in green, and feeling something sharp and entirely unjustifiable about it that she was not ready to assign a name to. She should have left. The professional obligations of the evening were satisfied. She had made the appearances that needed to be made. There was nothing holding her in this room except the oldest and least defensible reason in the catalog of human experience. She could not make herself leave while he was still in it. She got a second whiskey. She did not drink that one either. It was while she stood near the dessert table, not eating, 2 full glasses of whiskey standing as quiet testimony to her current state of self-management, that the boy drifted away from his father for the first time. Marcus had been absorbed into a cluster of men near the presentation stage, the kind of gravitational conversation that forms around urgency or capital, and the boy moved with the composed independence of a child who has attended enough adult events to know the drill, toward the dessert arrangement. He selected a chocolate tartlet. He examined it briefly. He ate exactly half of it before deciding, apparently, to assess the alternatives. Claire did not plan what happened next. She moved toward the table because she needed somewhere to be with apparent purpose, and the dessert table was somewhere. She picked up a plate. She selected something without looking at it. She took a bite. It was good. "The raspberry ones are better," said a voice below and to her left. She looked down. The boy was still studying the dessert display with the quiet focus he appeared to bring to most things, and he delivered this information as a simple matter of fact, without looking at her. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He glanced up. Dark eyes. His father's exactly. The particular brown that catches light and holds it. He assessed her with the frank attention that children still allow themselves, reading her the way children read adults, for honesty rather than presentation. Then he looked back at the table. "Are you one of my dad's business people?" he asked. The question arrived with the clean, uncomplicated accuracy of something a 7-year-old has no reason to soften. "No," Claire said, "I'm not." "Okay." He selected a raspberry tartlet, inspected it, and bit into it. Then he looked at her again, and this time held it a moment longer. "You looked at him a lot," he said. "I noticed." She was 32 years old and standing near a dessert table at a black tie gala. And a 7-year-old had just said the most honest thing anyone had said to her in recent memory. She set her plate down carefully. "The chocolate was very good," she said. "Thank you for the tip." She walked away before anything else could be said. She found her coat. She found the exit. She was in a taxi heading uptown before she allowed herself to take a full breath. 7 years, she thought. 7 years and a 7-year-old, and the man hadn't so much as crossed the room. She pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass and watched the city move past and told herself with great precision that whatever had surfaced tonight was old chemistry and guilt and the disorientation of confronting a consequence she had spent years refusing to look at directly, and that none of that was the same as love, and she was far too intelligent to confuse them. She was a grown woman. She knew the difference. She told herself all of this clearly and rationally and with complete conviction. And then she lay awake until 4 a.m. with Noah Webb's voice on quiet repeat. "You looked at him a lot." I noticed. 7 years old. His father's son. Already watching the world with those still, patient eyes. Already building his understanding of it one careful observation at a time. She searched it at 7:43. Marcus James Webb, 35. Founder and CEO of Webb Infrastructure Partners, a private equity firm specializing in urban development and civil engineering ventures, with a secondary focus on affordable housing initiatives and municipal infrastructure in underserved communities. Established 4 years ago. Current portfolio valued at an estimated $340 million. Named to Forbes' annual list of most influential entrepreneurs in infrastructure the previous spring. Featured in a Bloomberg profile published 18 months prior, with the headline, "From Blueprint to Billions, How One Engineer Built an Empire from the Ground Up." The subheading mentioned resilience. It also mentioned loss. She read the entire profile. He had started the firm 2 years after the divorce was finalized, with his own savings and a business partner named Joel Reyes, a Columbia MBA he had worked alongside at the city engineering division. They had pitched 3 investors. Received 2 rejections and 1 yes. A $12 million commitment from a firm that specialized in what they called patient capital. Money that understood it might wait 3 years to see meaningful return. They built the rest through revenue. The firm's first major project was a community center renovation in East Harlem, completed under budget and 18 days ahead of schedule. The word of mouth this generated in municipal and development circles was, according to the profile, the kind that could not be manufactured or purchased. 2 larger contracts followed quickly. Then, private equity interest. Then, the portfolio. Near the end of the piece, the interviewer had asked about turning points. The decision to leave public sector work. The speed of the ascent, which the interviewer described as, quote, unusual, even by the standards of entrepreneurial mythology. Marcus had paused before answering. The interviewer noted the pause specifically. Loss clarifies, he had said. I spent years building things for the city, for other people's futures. Good work I believed in. But it wasn't until I was left with nothing except my son that I understood what I was actually capable of. Grief is the most efficient editor there is. It takes everything away and leaves only what's true. Either you collapse under that or you pick it up and build something from it. I decided to build. He did not elaborate on the source of the grief. The interviewer had moved on. Claire closed her laptop. She sat in the morning light and understood, with the kind of clarity that is almost physical, that she had been operating for 7 years on a false premise. She had assumed, without examining it, because examining it would have required a honesty she was not prepared to perform, that Marcus had contracted in her absence. Not painfully, not dramatically, simply that removing herself from the equation had reduced him. The way removing something load-bearing doesn't cause collapse but does produce a structure that is less than what it was. The Bloomberg profile was a detailed correction to this assumption. She sat with that for a while. The particular weight of realizing that the story you have been telling yourself about your own life is not the only version, that somewhere, in the spaces where you were not looking, an alternate history had been quietly unfolding with its own logic and its own remarkable outcomes. She had left Marcus Webb to find more. He had been left by Claire Sutton, and built an empire from it. Both of those things were simultaneously true, and they were not reconcilable into any version of the story that left her as the heroine. She went to work. She was, as always, excellent at work. She had 3 client meetings. A long call about retail restructuring that she managed with full competence and approximately 30% of her conscious attention. A proposal review that she completed with the precision of someone running on professional autopilot. At 5, she closed her office door and sat in the late afternoon quiet, and allowed herself to feel without management what she had been carefully managing all day. She had been 25. She had chosen shine over substance and told herself it was ambition. She had left a man who loved her with the patient, structural devotion of someone who builds things designed to outlast the weather, and she had walked into a penthouse and told herself it was a bigger life. She was 32. She had the bigger life, and it was quiet in ways she had not fully anticipated when she chose it. By Friday, she had decided, cleanly, rationally, with the clear-eyed pragmatism of a woman who built a career on making good decisions, that there was no action to take. They had made accidental eye contact at an industry event. He had not spoken to her. There was no opening, and she had no right to create one. She was going to close the file, leave it closed, redirect her considerable intelligence toward literally anything else. She lasted until Friday at 3:15 before she called Sarah Okafor. Sarah had been her closest friend for 21 years. They had met in a college dorm in September, bonded over bad dining hall coffee and a shared contempt for a particular professor, and stayed close across 2 decades and 2 coasts, through the specific mechanism of choosing each other every year without drama. Sarah was a pediatric nurse in Atlanta. She was direct by nature, by profession, and by long practice with Claire specifically. She was one of 3 people alive who had known Claire and Marcus as a couple, and loved both of them separately, and told the truth about both without apology. I saw him, Claire said when Sarah answered. At the Meridian, Marcus. Marcus. Yes. How did he look? Like someone gave my ex-husband 7 years and 140 IQs worth of grief and $300 million and he used all 3 wisely. Sarah let out a breath that landed somewhere between a laugh and a wince. Baby, what do you need right now? I don't know, Claire said. And then, because this was Sarah, he didn't speak to me. He saw me from across the room and went back to his conversation. I was nothing. I was furniture. 7 years and a marriage and everything that happened, and I was just something that happened to be in his sightline for 4 seconds. Claire. I know. You left him. Not cruel. Just direct. Sarah, I understand the sequence of events. I'm saying it because what you're describing is the behavior of someone who is healed. Someone who processed something genuinely terrible and came out on the other side of it. That's the outcome we were hoping for back then, for both of you. He's past it, Claire said. Completely. It's not that he hides it or manages it, the chapter is finished, I can see it from across a room. And that's harder to sit with than anger would have been. She looked at the Manhattan skyline through her office window, the late afternoon light going bronze across the buildings. It's accurate, she said finally. That's what makes it hard. It's not cruel. It's just true. What do you actually want, Claire? Sarah asked. From this, honestly. The question sat in the space between them. Claire let it sit. She was 32, and she knew herself well enough to know that the honest answer and the answer she was comfortable saying out loud were not always the same. She had been confusing the two for years. I want to understand what he built, she said carefully. I want to know how he did it. I want... She stopped. You want him to have left a door open, Sarah said quietly. And you're not sure he did. And you're deciding how to live with that. They talked for another 20 minutes. The conversation ended with a promise. No action, no contact, no engineering of proximity. 2 weeks. Work and breathe and let whatever this was settle into something she could think about with a clear head. Claire kept that promise through the weekend. She kept it Monday morning when she walked into her office with good coffee and a full calendar and a completely functional professional identity, and nothing to indicate to anyone in her vicinity that she was in any way unsettled. She kept it right up until her assistant met her at the door. The card was heavy cream stock. The type was clean, minimal, the understated navy logo of Web Infrastructure Partners. She turned it over. On the back, in handwriting she recognized with the immediate, involuntary recognition of something the body remembers before the mind does. The right-leaning, precise, slightly architectural slant of an engineer who draws things accurately, were 6 words. We should probably talk. Tuesday. Noon. No question mark, no phone number, no address. The unadorned certainty of a man who had decided something and did not see any reason to dress it as a request. Her assistant said the card had been left at the reception desk that morning, by a man in a dark suit. No additional message. Claire stood in the doorway of her office and held the card for a long time. She thought about Sarah, about loss that clarifies, about the patient architectural quality of a love built to last, and what it does when the person it was built for walks away from it, and whether something built that carefully ever fully stops. She opened her calendar. She blocked Tuesday from 11:30 to 2. And then she sat in the quiet of her own office, on the 28th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, holding a card from a man she had once loved enough to leave, turning it over slowly in her hands, understanding for the first time in 7 years that she might have made the worst decision of her life, and that he had found her before she could find him. She arrived at the address on the Web Infrastructure Partners website at 11:58. The offices occupied the top 2 floors of a glass and steel building on West 57th Street. Not the flashiest address in Manhattan, but deliberate in the way that serious money tends to be deliberate. The lobby had the quiet confidence of a place that doesn't need to announce itself. She gave her name at the front desk and was escorted to a conference room on the upper floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. The trees were full October color. She stood at the glass and looked at the city and told herself she was calm. She was not calm. Marcus walked in at exactly noon. He was in a different suit today, navy, not charcoal, with a white shirt open at the collar, no tie. He looked like a man who had decided, somewhere in the last 7 years, that he no longer needed to dress for other people's approval. He carried 2 cups of coffee and set one on the table in front of her without asking how she took it. Black. He remembered. Thank you for coming, he said. He sat down across from her, not beside her. Across. The geometry was deliberate and she noted it. You left a card at my office, she said. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Fair," he said. They looked at each other across the table. 7 years of accumulated silence occupied the space between them like a third person. Claire had rehearsed this moment, had run it through her head a dozen times since Monday, had prepared for multiple versions of it, had armored herself with the rational understanding that this was simply a meeting between two adults with unresolved history. She was prepared for it. She was not prepared for how ordinary he looked. Not ordinary, that was the wrong word. How present. How entirely, uncomplicatedly himself. The Marcus she remembered had always been grounded, but it had been the groundedness of a young man who hadn't yet been tested. This was something different. This was the groundedness of someone who had been tested thoroughly and had not moved. "How's your firm?" he asked. "Good," she said. "Growing. You've clearly read about it, or you wouldn't have known where to send the card." "I did some reading, yes." "So did I," she said. "Forbes, Bloomberg. Congratulations, Marcus. What you built is extraordinary." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you." The coffee was very good. She drank some of it and waited. He had called this meeting. She was not going to fill the silence for him. He set his cup down, turned it once, slowly. "I saw you at the Meridian, and I thought about letting it go," he said. "Letting you walk out and going back to my life and not opening any of this up again. I thought about it for 2 days. And then you sent the card. And then I sent the card." He met her eyes. "Because I realized I had some things I needed to say. Not for you, for me. And I thought, if she comes, she comes. If she doesn't, that's an answer too." Claire set her own cup down. "I'm here," she said. "You are." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not angry with you, Claire. I want you to know that first because I think you came in here braced for it. I was, for a long time. But anger is expensive, and I had a company to build and a kid to raise, and at some point the cost didn't justify what I was getting from it." "That's very rational," she said carefully. "It's the truth." He looked at her with the direct, unhurried honesty of a man who has made peace with something at significant personal cost. "You made a choice that was right for you at the time. It was devastating for me at the time. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is the whole story." "What's the whole story, then?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "The whole story," Marcus said, "is that you leaving me was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and also, eventually, the thing that made me who I am. I'm not grateful for it. I'm not going to tell you it was a gift. But I'm also not going to pretend that the person sitting across from you right now would exist if you'd stayed." He paused. Noah wouldn't exist. So, she had known, abstractly, that there was a second marriage. She had not allowed herself to think about the full shape of it. "His mother," she said carefully. "What happened?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window, then back at her. "Her name was Diane. We met 2 years after you and I divorced. She was an architect, smart, warm, good with Noah from the very beginning." He paused. "Ovarian cancer. She was 31 when she was diagnosed. She died 14 months later. Noah was 3. The words landed in the room and stayed there. "Marcus," Claire said. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you." He said it simply, without deflection. "It was the hardest thing I've ever lived through. Harder than the divorce, and the divorce was very hard. She was a good person. She didn't deserve it. Noah doesn't remember her, which is the thing that breaks my heart more than anything else. He knows her from photographs. He knows the things I tell him. But he doesn't remember her voice." Claire was quiet. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be inadequate, and she had long since learned that inadequate words are worse than silence. "I'm telling you this," Marcus continued, "because you asked and because I think you need to understand what my life actually looks like before we have whatever conversation we're about to have." He looked at her steadily. "Which brings me to why I actually sent the card." She waited. "I saw you across that ballroom," he said. "And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. And I need you to understand that I am not a man who acts on feelings without examining them first. I think you know that about me. So I examined it. For 2 days. And what I concluded is that I don't know what it means yet. But I know that walking away from it without saying anything would be the kind of thing I'd regret. And I have enough regrets. The October light came through the windows and lay across the table between them. Claire looked at the man she had left and the man he had become, and understood that they were the same person, and that she had been wrong about almost everything. "What are you asking me?" "Marcus," she said. "I'm asking," he said carefully, "if you'd like to have dinner. This week. Just dinner." The simplicity of it was almost unbearable. "Just dinner," she said. "Just dinner." The corner of his mouth moved again. "You can think about it. I'm not asking you to resolve anything. I'm asking you to have dinner with me and see what that is." She thought about Sarah's voice. No action. No contact. Give it 2 weeks. She thought about the business card on her desk. About the 6 words with no question mark. She thought about Noah Webb at a dessert table, with his father's eyes and his father's patience, and his father's absolute architectural certainty about the things worth paying attention to. "Thursday," she said. "I'm free Thursday evening." Marcus nodded once, the way a man nods when something has been confirmed that he already believed would be confirmed, not with arrogance, but with the quiet accuracy of someone who has learned to read situations correctly. "Thursday," he said. "I'll make a reservation." She stood. He stood. They were the same height she remembered, which was not the same height at all, because height is only partly physical, and the rest of it is everything the years have stacked up inside a person. "Marcus," she said, at the door. He looked at her. "Noah," she said, "he's remarkable." Something changed in Marcus Webb's face then. Not dramatically, not in a way that would read across a room, but enough. Enough that she saw it and knew what it meant. "He is," he said quietly. "He's the best thing I ever did." She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood in the lobby of a building on West 57th Street and understood, for the first time since she was 25 years old and standing in a break room under bad fluorescent lights, that she had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. It was the most alive she had felt in years. Some stories move in straight lines. A problem appears. Obstacles are overcome. The ending arrives like a station you've been heading toward all along. This is not that kind of story, because what happened between Thursday dinner and the 6 weeks that followed was not a straight line. It was the thing all the straight lines had been leading to without anyone realizing, and it nearly broke both of them before it became something else entirely. But first, Thursday. The restaurant Marcus chose was on the Upper East Side, not the kind of place that appears in best-of lists because it doesn't need to. The kind of place that has been the same for 30 years because it got things right 30 years ago. Quiet tables, good wine, the particular intimacy of a room that understands its purpose. Claire arrived first and hated herself a little for it. He arrived 3 minutes later, in a dark jacket and the same unhurried ease he'd carried into every room she'd seen him in lately, and she had the disorienting experience of watching him scan the room, locate her, and smile. Actually smile. Not the careful non-expression of the conference room, for the first time since the Meridian. It was a different smile than the one she remembered from their marriage. Quieter, more considered. A smile that had been earned rather than given automatically. They ordered. They talked. At first carefully, in the deliberate navigating way of two people who know that the territory between them contains unmarked hazards, and then gradually less carefully, and then not carefully at all, in the way of two people who, despite everything, have always spoken the same language. He told her about building the firm. The early rejections, the single yes, the 18-hour days and the spreadsheets on the kitchen table after Noah was asleep. He told her about Joel Reyes, who had become his closest friend, and who had pulled him back from the edge more than once in the first year after Diane died. He told her about Noah, not the polished version, not the anecdote, but the real thing. The nightmares Noah had at 4 years old that he hadn't fully understood, the way the boy had started carrying a photograph of Diane in the breast pocket of whatever jacket he wore, the evening last spring when Noah had asked his father with the precise, surgical directness of a 7-year-old, whether his mother had known she was going to die, and whether she had been scared. "What did you say?" Claire asked. I said yes, she knew. And I said she wasn't scared. She was sad to be leaving. But she wasn't scared because she knew that he and I were going to be okay. He looked at his wine glass. I don't know if that last part was true, I hope it was. Claire listened. She asked questions. She did the thing she had not been good at 25, the thing she had spent 7 years quietly learning how to do. She was present. She told him about Daniel. Not the polished version either, and the real one. The realization, arriving incrementally and then all at once, that she had traded one kind of smallness for a different kind. The loneliness of being with someone who saw her as a reflection of his own taste, rather than as a person with her own interior life. The specific quality of leaving that relationship, not with drama, not with grief, but with the flat, tired acknowledgement that she had made a mistake and now she was correcting it. Did you love him? Marcus asked. Quiet. Not accusatory. Just a question. She thought about it honestly. I loved what he represented, she said. I loved what being with him said about me. For a while. That's not the same thing. He nodded. Didn't press it. They stayed until the restaurant was mostly empty. When they walked out onto the street, the October air was sharp and clean, and the city was doing what it does on weeknights. Moving, always moving. The particular restless energy of 8 million people living in close proximity to everything. He walked her to a cab. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. This was good, she said. It was, he agreed. She got in the cab. She looked back through the window as it pulled away. He was still standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the cab until it turned the corner. Not with need. Just with attention. The way Marcus Webb had always watched things he considered worth watching. 3 more dinners followed over the next 4 weeks. A walk through the park one Sunday afternoon, Noah in tow, the boy polite and watchful, keeping a careful distance from Claire. Assessing her with those steady eyes in the way of a child who has learned to take nothing on faith. She did not try to win him over. She was simply present and honest and interested in what he had to say, and she did not push. There was an evening in mid-November when Claire arrived to find Noah at the kitchen table with a book he couldn't fully parse, a chapter book slightly above his reading level, which he had apparently selected because it had a building on the cover. He looked up at her with an expression that was not quite a request, and not quite nothing, and she sat down without asking, and they read it together for 40 minutes, his finger following the lines, her voice filling in the words he didn't know yet. Marcus stood in the doorway for a few minutes watching. He didn't interrupt. He went and made tea and let it happen at the pace it needed to happen. Because that is the other thing about a man who builds things carefully. He knows that you don't rush the foundation. You build it right and then you trust it. But things were not uncomplicated. Things were never uncomplicated. The complication arrived in the form of a woman named Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was 40, VP of Development at a real estate group that had partnered with Web Infrastructure Partners on 2 projects. She was precise and beautiful and had been, according to a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it with the particular relish of someone delivering news they know will land, quietly involved with Marcus for about 6 months before the Meridian Gala. Involved was the word used. Claire filed it and did not react outwardly. Inwardly she felt the floor shift in a way that had nothing to do with marble and everything to do with her own hypocrisy. She had no claim. She knew she had no claim. She asked Marcus about it directly on a Wednesday evening in November, standing in the lobby of a building after a dinner that had been slightly off, both of them careful in a way they hadn't been lately, the air between them carrying something unspoken. Vanessa Cole, she said. Someone mentioned it to me. I'm not asking you to account for yourself, I think we should be honest about where things stand. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then, we dated for a few months. It ended before the Meridian. She ended it, actually. She said she could tell I wasn't fully there. He paused. She was right. Why weren't you fully there? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, because I think some part of me had been waiting to find out if this, he gestured very slightly at the space between them, was still something. I didn't let myself say that out loud until I saw you at that gala. But it was there. Claire looked at him, this man who had built an empire from her leaving, who had loved someone else and lost her. who was raising a child alone with the careful structural devotion that he brought to everything, who had sent 6 words on a card with no question mark because he trusted, with the quiet certainty of an engineer that the structure was sound. "Marcus," she said, "I need you to know something." He waited. "I left you because I was 25 and I was afraid," she said. "Not of you. Of myself. Of how much I wanted the life you were offering me. And how terrified I was that wanting it meant settling. That staying meant admitting the ambitious version of myself was something I'd invented." She stopped. Started again. "I was wrong. About what ambition means. About what a bigger life looks like. And I have spent 7 years building something impressive and arriving at the end of every day in a very quiet apartment. And She stopped again. "Claire," he said. "I'm still figuring out how to say it," she said. "Take your time," he said. "I've been patient this long." Something broke open in her chest then. Not painfully, or not only painfully. The way something breaks open when it has been held closed for too long and the pressure finally equalizes. She looked at him. "I don't want to have dinner and go home to my apartment," she said. "I don't want to be careful. I want to stop being afraid of what I want." Marcus Webb looked at the woman he had loved at 28, and the woman she had become at 32, and he took one step forward and put both hands on either side of her face with the same precision and care he brought to everything he built. And he did not say anything at all. He didn't need to. But the story was not finished, because there was still one person who had not yet decided what she thought about any of this. One person whose opinion would matter more than all of the dinners, and all of the honest conversations, and all of the careful, reconstructed trust in the world. A 7-year-old boy with his father's eyes and his mother's photograph in his jacket pocket. And Noah Webb, who had been watching and measuring and waiting with the patience of someone who has already lost the one person who was supposed to stay. Noah Webb had not yet decided if Claire Sutton was someone who stayed. There is a moment in every story where the thing that has been building finally arrives. Not with fanfare. That's a myth, the fanfare. In real life, the most important moments tend to arrive quietly, through a half-open door, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, in the voice of a child who has decided, without announcing it, that something has changed. This is how it happened. It was the last week of November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. Claire had been invited, with the measured, deliberate casualness of a man who chooses his words carefully, to join Marcus and Noah for the holiday. She had said she would think about it. She had been thinking about it for 4 days with the focused anxiety of someone who understood, fully, what the invitation actually meant. Noah had been polite to her, consistently, correctly, precisely polite, in the way of a child who has been taught good manners and is deploying them as a neutral shield. He answered her questions. He showed her things when she asked. He ate dinner when she was at their apartment without making it difficult for anyone. But he did not reach for her. He did not seek her out. He kept the careful, measured distance of someone who has been hurt by the departure of a woman before, and has no intention of being hurt again, even if he couldn't have articulated it in those terms. Claire understood this. She had been patient. She had not pushed. She had shown up and been present, and let him set the pace, and told herself that this was what love looked like when it was actually love, not the version that needed to be received immediately, but the version that could wait. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, she arrived at Marcus's apartment on the Upper West Side, to find Noah alone in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with a piece of paper and a collection of crayons, working on something with the focused intensity he brought to most things. Marcus was on a call in his office, the door slightly ajar. He mouthed 5 minutes at her. She nodded and took off her coat and went to the kitchen. Noah did not look up. She poured herself a glass of water. She leaned against the counter at a reasonable distance from where he was working and looked at what he was drawing. It appeared to be a building. A very precise building for a 7-year-old with careful windows and a door and what appeared to be a flagpole. "Is that a real building?" she asked. He looked at his drawing, then at her. "It's my school," he said. "It looks like a good school." "It's okay," he said. He looked back at the drawing. He added a window. Then he said without looking up, "My dad likes you." The words dropped into the kitchen air with the simple, unadorned weight of something a child has been carrying around for a while and has finally decided to put down. "I know," Claire said carefully. "I like him too." Noah added another window. He was quiet for a moment, and Claire recognized the quality of his silence. It was the silence of someone who is not finished, who is simply organizing the next thing they want to say. "My mom died," he said. "I know," she said. "Your dad told me about her. He said she was very kind." She was. He looked at his drawing. "I don't really remember her, but I have a picture." He patted the chest pocket of his shirt, the gesture so practiced and automatic it was clearly something he did many times a day. "I keep it here." "That's a good place to keep it," Claire said. He looked up at her then. Not the quick, assessing glance he usually gave her, but a longer look, the kind that children allow themselves when they've decided something deserves it. His father's eyes, dark and patient and entirely present. "Do you have a kid?" he asked. "No," she said. "Do you want one?" The question arrived with the tranquil, devastating precision of a 7-year-old asking something that a room full of adults would spend weeks being careful not to say. Claire looked at this boy, this serious, watchful, armored, extraordinary boy who carried his dead mother's photograph in his shirt pocket and ate hors d'oeuvres like a small senator, and had told her, at a dessert table at a gala, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years, and felt something shift in her chest that she recognized this time for exactly what it was. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." Noah looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked back at his drawing. He added a small figure in front of the school, a child. Claire realized, with a crayon dot for a head and 2 straight lines for legs. Then he added another figure beside it, taller, with longer hair, indicated by a brown scribble. He did not say anything about it. He simply drew it and set the crayon down and pushed the drawing slightly toward her on the counter, in a gesture so small and so enormous that Claire had to look at the ceiling for a moment to compose herself. She looked at the drawing for a long time. The small figure and the tall figure, standing in front of a school that looked like his school. "This is very good," she said. "You can have it," Noah said, casually, looking at his crayons, as if it were nothing, as if it were not, in fact, everything. Marcus appeared in the doorway a moment later, phone call finished, and looked from his son to Claire to the drawing on the counter. He read the situation with the accurate, unhurried comprehension of a man who has spent 7 years learning to pay attention to things that matter. He did not say anything either. He walked to the counter, picked up a crayon, brown, the same one Noah had used, and added a third figure to the drawing, taller still, with a small rectangle in one hand that might have been a phone, or a blueprint, or simply a way of existing in the world. 3 figures in front of a school. Noah looked at the drawing. Then he looked at his father. Then, for the first time since Claire had known him, the first time, in all the dinners and the walks and the careful, patient weeks of being present without pushing, he looked at Claire the way a child looks at someone who is going to be part of the story. Not with declaration, not with drama, just with recognition. The way you look at someone you've decided to let in. Thanksgiving was the 4 of them, Marcus and Noah and Claire and Sarah Okafor, who had flown up from Atlanta because Claire had called her 3 days before and said, "I think something is actually happening," and Sarah had said, "I'll book the flight," before she finished the sentence. They ate at Marcus's apartment, a table crowded with more food than 4 people needed, and Noah sat next to Claire and showed her his entire crayon collection after dinner, categorized by color, with the serious explanatory thoroughness of a child sharing something he genuinely values. It was not a clean ending. Nothing real is clean. There were more conversations to be had, more trust to be built, more mornings to be navigated, and more evenings to be learned. There was a child who still had a photograph in his shirt pocket, who still missed someone he couldn't remember, who was still learning what it meant to let a new person into the space that loss had carved out. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, the story continued as stories do, not in revelations but in accumulation, in small moments that don't announce themselves as important until you look back and understand that they were the whole thing all along. Noah started showing Claire his homework without being asked. Not every night, not with fanfare. simply placing it on the counter near where she was sitting. The gesture as casual and as enormous as the drawing had been. She looked at it. She asked questions. She got things wrong sometimes, which made him laugh in the involuntary way of a child who finds adult errors genuinely surprising and a little delightful. He stopped keeping quite such careful distance. He still had the photograph in his shirt pocket. He would always have it. Claire did not want him to stop having it. She understood, with the full weight of everything she had learned about love in 32 years of trying to understand it, that there was room for more than one person in a life. That loving someone new does not require forgetting someone old. And she intended, in whatever capacity the future gave her, to make sure Noah Webb grew up knowing that. One evening in December, 3 weeks before Christmas, Noah fell asleep on the couch before his bedtime, exhausted from a school event. Marcus carried him to bed and came back to find Claire standing at the window looking at the city. He stood beside her. "He asked me yesterday," Marcus said quietly, "if you were going to be here for Christmas." Claire looked at him. "What did you say?" "I said I hoped so." He met her eyes. "I said it was up to you." She turned back to the window. The city was lit for the season, the particular warmth of December lights against dark buildings. The whole impossible, beautiful thing of a place that has seen everything and continues regardless. "Tell him yes," she said. Marcus put his hand over hers on the window ledge, and they stood there for a while in the quiet of the apartment, with the city below them and a sleeping child down the hall and 7 years of distance finally, completely resolved into this. It was not the life she had chosen at 25. It was something far better. It was the life she had earned by losing it. And then, against all reasonable expectation, and with the patient help of a man who had always known how to build things designed to last, finding her way back to the door. And this time she walked through it.